Story 1. The Museum Stalker. It was supposed to be just another field trip, a day out of class, a chance to wander the museum and pretend to learn something. As a freshman, I wasn't terribly excited, but I wasn't going to complain about not having to study for a day. The museum was bigger than I expected, a maze of exhibits and dark, winding hallways that made it easy to get lost. Skylar, a classmate, and I decided to explore on our own after our professor gave us permission. We found ourselves drawn to the outdoor exhibits where the air was fresh and the sunlight filtered through the trees. But getting there was more complicated than we thought. The museum's layout was confusing, a maze of interconnected rooms with dark ceilings that made everything seem a little strange. It didn't take long for us to realize we weren't alone. As we entered one of the darker rooms, I noticed a man standing in the corner. He was the only one there, dressed all in black, which struck me as odd since the museum staff all wore blue. But I ignored it. Maybe he worked there, just in a different capacity. But as he started walking away, something about his movements caught my attention. He didn't just leave. He snuck into a back room, one that was clearly marked "Do Not Enter." I nudged Skylar and we both exchanged uneasy looks. Something about him was off, but we tried to ignore it and move on. 10 minutes later, we saw him again. This time, we were in a different room, but he appeared out of nowhere, emerging from another restricted area. He stood there just looking at us. His gaze was fixed on us with the kind of intensity that made my skin crawl. I tried to act like I didn't notice him, but it was impossible to ignore. He was closer this time, and the way he was staring at us felt wrong, like he was sizing us up, deciding something. We decided to leave the room, moving quickly but not too quickly, trying not to attract attention. But as we walked out, I saw that he had started moving too. He was following us. The museum, once a place of curiosity and learning, had become a nightmare. We ran from room to room, trying to lose him in the maze-like hallways. Every turn felt like a dead end, every corner a trap. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel Skylar's panic as well as mine. Finally, we made it back to where the rest of the class was gathered. I saw our professor, who was starting to gather everyone to leave. I felt relieved as we rejoined the group, but just when I thought we were safe, 2 museum staff rushed in, their faces serious. They announced that the museum was being closed. Panic erupted as we were all herded into a nearby room, the door shutting behind us. My mind raced. What was going on? Was it because of the man we had seen? My intuition told me so. The tension in the room was thick, the air stopped. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting him to burst in at any moment. After what seemed like an eternity, the lockdown was lifted. We were allowed to leave, but the feeling of dread did not go away. As we boarded the bus, I heard someone say that the man had attacked a museum staff member and had fled before security could. I tried to stop thinking about what might have happened if Skylar and I hadn't escaped. The way he stared at us, the way he watched us, it was obvious he had some twisted plan in mind. Museums were supposed to be safe places, places where the past was preserved and protected, but that day, it had become a hunting ground, and we were the prey. Story 2. The Stalker. My senior year of high school had its ups and downs, but nothing prepared me for what happened on that field trip. I was 18 years old, eager to finish school and move on to bigger things. The trip was supposed to be just another day out, a chance to escape the monotony of class and see some art. I wasn't feeling well that day, so I missed the class trip, but my grades were important to me. When my teacher offered to let me visit the museum on my free time to make up for an assignment, I jumped at the chance. That Saturday, I arrived at the museum just after it opened. The place was nearly empty, which I was grateful for. I wanted to get the assignment done quickly and enjoy the rest of the weekend. The assignment was simple, a series of questions about the exhibits and the artist who created them. But halfway through, something changed. I was standing in front of a large painting, lost in thought. When I felt it, a pair of eyes staring at me. I turned and saw him. A man older, maybe in his 50s, with messy hair and a scraggly beard. He just stood there, staring at me, not saying a word. His gaze was intense, unsettling. It felt like he was peeling back layers, trying to see something hidden beneath the surface. I quickly turned away, moving to another exhibit, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But 10 minutes later, I saw him again. This time, he was above me, standing on a balcony overlooking the exhibit I was in. He smiled when our eyes met, a slow, furtive smile that sent a chill down my spine. Then he raised his hand and made a gesture, beckoning me to come to him. I didn't. I turned and walked as fast as I could without running. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. Who was he? Why was he following me? I thought about going to the staff, but I didn't want to make a scene. I told myself he was just a creepy guy, harmless, more of a nuisance than a danger. But as I hurried through the museum, trying to finish my assignment, I realized he was following me. Every room I entered, he was there, lurking just out of sight, his eyes following my every move. I began to panic, my thoughts spinning. What did he want? Why was he doing this? I finished the last question as quickly as I could and headed for the exit. The museum was quiet, a few visitors scattered throughout the hallways. I reached the front door and felt a sense of relief as I stepped outside, the cool air hitting. I rushed to my car, eager to leave this nightmare behind. But as soon as I opened the door, I froze. From under my car, the man appeared. His eyes were wild, moving fast and purposeful. He lunged at me, arms outstretched, his face twisted in a predatory grimace. I barely had time to react. I jumped back, narrowly avoiding his grasp, and ran toward the museum. I don't remember much of the sprint back inside, just the sheer terror as I burst through the doors. I found an employee gasping for breath and told them what had happened. The police were called, and I waited inside, surrounded by people, but the security I felt was fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the area, but he was gone without a trace. I was shocked more than I care to admit. All the way home, I kept looking back, half expecting him to appear again. What haunts me most, even now, is the thought that he had been watching me long before I had noticed him. He knew which car was mine. He knew when I would be alone. He had planned it all, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The museum, a place of culture and beauty, had become the setting for a nightmare I could not escape. Even now, years later, the memory of that day remains, a shadow I cannot escape. Every time I see a painting or walk through a quiet hallway, I wonder if he is still out there, waiting for his next opportunity. Story 3. The Night Shift. Working the night shift at a museum is supposed to be quiet, almost peaceful. For the past 6 months, that's been true for the most part. I started working there to pay some bills, and the work itself isn't bad. The museum is old. One of those vast buildings filled with priceless art, echoes of the past, and stories hidden in the shadows. It's more than just a job. It's like taking a walk through history every night. But as the weeks passed, things began to change. It started out on a regular night a few months ago. My shift was nothing special, just the usual rounds. Dusting the statues, making sure the lighting was perfect, checking that everything was ready for the next day's visitors. I'd been through most of the rooms and was ready for break time. The break room had always been a little sanctuary, a place to relax with a sandwich before heading back to the quiet hallways. But that night, as I sat down to eat, something strange happened. A knock sounded out of nowhere, loud and frantic. It shook the door as if someone was desperate to get in. I jumped up, my heart pounding, and yanked the door open, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, the silence almost mocking its stillness. I stepped outside, looked around, even called out, but the only response was the echo of my own. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the old building sinking, or maybe one of my coworkers was teasing me. But they weren't the prankster type, and something about the way the knock sounded, urgent, almost panicked, just didn't feel right. I propped the door open as I turned around, hoping that would help ease my anxiety. But then, as soon as I sat down, I heard it again. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, stomping down the hall. I was sure it was one of those guys, so I got up and went to check, but again, nothing. Same eerie silence, same empty hallway. I finished my shift that night, but the unease still lingered. Over the next few weeks, I heard strange noises here and there, whispers in the dark, shuffling footsteps when no one else was around. It was creepy, but nothing I couldn't handle. At least, that's what I thought. Last week, I was working in one of those high-ceilinged rooms, the kind that make you feel small, like the walls were watching you. I was standing on a ladder, about 20 feet up, changing a light bulb in one of the overhead ones. This job required my full attention, the kind that makes you forget everything else. I was almost done when I heard footsteps entering the room. They were slow, deliberate, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I assumed it was one of my coworkers, so I called out without looking, asking what was going on. There was no answer. Then suddenly, I felt it. The ladder shook violently, as if someone had kicked it from below. I barely had time to react. The ladder swayed, tilting dangerously to one side. I lost my balance, sliding down several steps. I managed to grab the ladder just in time. But the light bulb I was holding wasn't so lucky. It shattered on the floor below, the sound echoing in the empty space. Gasping, I looked down, expecting to see my troublemaker, but there was no one. The room was empty, the only sound the ringing in my ears and my own labored breathing. I crawled down the stairs and ran through the museum until I found my colleagues. I told them what had happened, hoping for some explanation, but they just seemed as scared as I was. We changed the light bulb together, but the fear was still there. It had been a week since then, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The thought of going back to that museum at night terrified me. Whatever had tried to knock me off that ladder could have killed me, and the worst part was, I didn't know what it was. Was it just the building playing tricks on me, or was there something else there with me? I was seriously considering giving up, but part of me was terrified of what might happen if I left. Will the thing that haunts those hallways let me go, or will it follow me, waiting for the right moment to strike again?